My husband didn't yell. He thanked me, walked away, and what happened next left me in tears. I've replayed that Tuesday evening so many times now that I can recite it like a script. Every word, every silence, every small sound the front door made when Callum finally closed it behind him for the last time. I was the one who broke our marriage. I need to say that plainly, before anything else, because everything that happened afterward only makes sense if you understand that I was not the wronged party in this story. I was the reason it ended. My name is Adeline. I was married to Callum for 6 years, together for 9 before that, and for 8 months of that marriage. I was also seeing someone else, a colleague named Marcus from a client company I worked with regularly, something that started as flirtation over conference calls and became, slowly, and then all at once, something I told myself I could keep separate from the rest of my life. I want to be honest about the shape of it, because I spent a long time after that Tuesday trying to make the story smaller than it was. Softer, more understandable. It wasn't small. It wasn't understandable. It was a choice I made, repeatedly, for 8 months, while my husband made me dinner and asked about my day and had absolutely no idea. I don't fully know how Callum found out. Not in the sense of tracing the exact thread that unraveled everything. What I know is that on that particular Tuesday, I came home from work to find him sitting at our kitchen table, our wedding photo turned face down beside him, and a scattered collection of printed emails, photos, and messages spread across the table like evidence at a trial, because that's essentially what it was. I stood in the doorway with my phone still in my hand, and I felt something in my chest simply drop out from under me. The specific vertigo of watching a version of your life end in real time, while you're still standing inside it. Callum, I started, and I don't even know what I intended to say after his name, because there wasn't a sentence in the world that was going to fix what was sitting on that table. He didn't yell. That's the detail that still undoes me more than almost anything else about that night. I had braced myself, walking into that kitchen, for shouting, for something breaking, for the kind of raw, furious confrontation I'd almost have found easier to survive, because at least it would have matched the size of what I'd done. Instead, he looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before, not rage, not even quite grief yet, something closer to a terrible, exhausted clarity, and he said, very quietly, "Thank you. Thank you for what?" I managed, my voice barely functioning. "For showing me the truth," Callum said. He gathered the papers slowly, evenly, like a man closing out a project rather than a marriage. I spent 6 years thinking I understood what we were. I'm grateful I found out now instead of 10 years from now, or 20. After we'd had kids, after I'd built even more of my life around something that wasn't real. It was real, I said. And even as I said it, I heard how hollow it sounded against everything spread across that table. "Callum, please, it wasn't. I never stopped loving you. I believe that you believe that," he said, standing still, unnervingly calm. "But I don't think it matters anymore, Adeline. Not to me. Not tonight." He walked past me toward our bedroom, packed a bag with the same unhurried, methodical calm he'd shown at the table. And by the time he came back down the stairs, duffel bag in hand, white shirt still crisp despite everything, I understood, with a certainty that felt like the floor genuinely tilting beneath me, that he wasn't performing calm to punish me. He simply, truly, had nothing left to say. He left a note on the small table by the door, before he walked out, the same careful handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists for 9 years. Now writing 4 words that would end up meaning more to me than almost anything else he'd ever written. "Thank you for showing me the truth." Then he opened the door, walked out into the evening, and didn't look back. I spent the rest of that night on the floor of our living room, papers still scattered around me from where I'd gone through the evidence myself after he left, needing, in some desperate, illogical way, to understand exactly what he'd seen, exactly how thorough the unraveling had been. Photos Marcus and I had exchanged, messages I'd deleted from my phone, but that had apparently, somehow, existed somewhere Callum had access to. A hotel receipt from a work trip I'd claimed was solo. I called him 4 times that night. He didn't answer. I texted him something long and desperate and only partly coherent, apologizing in circles, and received, an hour later, a single response, "I need time." Please don't call again tonight. What I didn't understand yet, sitting on that floor, was that Callum's calm hadn't been the absence of devastation. It had been devastation so complete that it had passed straight through anger into something quieter. And in its own way, more final. I learned this later. Weeks afterward, in the one real conversation we managed to have, once the initial wreckage had settled enough for either of us to speak in full sentences. I wasn't calm because I didn't care, he told me, sitting across from me at a coffee shop. Neither of us had ever been to together. Neutral ground, careful distance between us. I was calm because somewhere in the 20 minutes before you got home, reading through everything, I understood that I'd already lost the thing I was afraid of losing. There was nothing left to fight for in that moment, just something to accept. I don't understand how you thanked me, I said, the words still catching in my throat weeks later. After everything. You thanked me. Because you did give me something true, Callum said. For 6 years I thought I had a marriage. That night, you handed me reality instead. Even though you never meant to hand me anything at all. I'd rather know. I've thought about that a lot since. I'd rather have the truth at 34 than keep building an entire life on top of something that wasn't real. Only to find out at 44 or 54. Once there was so much more to lose, we didn't reconcile. I want to be honest about that too, because I know stories like this sometimes bend toward reconciliation. Toward some redemptive arc where the person who did the damage gets to earn their way back. That's not what happened here, and I've come slowly to understand why it shouldn't have. Callum filed for divorce 3 weeks after that, Tuesday. He was fair about it, genuinely fair. More generous with the division of what we'd built together than I probably deserved. Never once using the affair as leverage in the proceedings, even though he legally could have. He simply wanted it done cleanly. The same unhurried, deliberate way he'd packed that duffel bag. The same steady calm with which he'd said thank you at our kitchen table. I moved out of our house within the month. Marcus and I didn't last. I want to be honest about that too, because it would be easy to frame this story as some grand romance that justified the wreckage, and it wasn't. What Marcus and I didn't survive contact with the actual consequences of what it had cost. We ended things 4 months after Callum left, quietly, without much ceremony. Because whatever we'd been to each other during those 8 months of secrecy simply couldn't hold up once it wasn't secret anymore. I spent the better part of a year afterward doing the specific, unglamorous work of trying to understand myself honestly, therapy, mostly. And a great deal of sitting with the discomfort of having been the person who broke something, rather than the person it happened to. It's a different kind of grief. Being the one responsible. There is no one to be angry at except yourself. And no clean way to grieve a marriage you ended through your own choices, without also grieving the version of yourself you thought you were before you made them. I ran into Callum 18 months later, entirely by accident, at a mutual friend's engagement party. Neither of us had realized the other would attend. He looked well, genuinely well. Not the performed wellness of someone still quietly falling apart behind a good haircut, but something that looked like actual peace. He was there with someone, a woman named Priya, and I watched them together for a few minutes before he noticed me, and understood, watching the easy way he looked at her, that whatever he'd lost that Tuesday night, he'd found something afterward that had nothing to do with me at all, and everything to do with a life he'd chosen to build honestly. On the other side of a truth he'd once thanked me for handing him. We spoke briefly, civilly. He asked how I was doing, and meant it, in the particular way people manage to mean things even towards someone who once hurt them badly. I told him I was doing the work of trying to be someone I could actually respect again. He nodded, like that made sense to him, and wished me well, and meant that too. I'm glad you're doing okay, I told him, and it cost me something real to say it. Watching him with someone who clearly made him happy in a way I apparently never fully had, even at our best. I am, he said simply. It took a long time to get here, but I am. I think about that Tuesday evening, more than I think about almost anything else from that whole period of my life. Not the affair itself, which I've done the work of understanding and taking responsibility for, but that specific moment at the kitchen table. Callum's quiet, thank you landing on me harder than any amount of yelling ever could have. I understand it differently now than I did that night, sitting devastated on our living room floor. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't cruelty either. It was a man choosing, in the worst moment of his life, to value truth over comfortable illusion, a choice that cost him enormously in the short term. And, from what I could see at that engagement party, gave him back something more durable in the years that followed. I broke something that night, irreparably, through choices that were entirely mine. But I learned something from the way Callum walked out of that kitchen that I've carried with me since. Into every relationship and every hard conversation that followed. That sometimes the most devastating response to betrayal isn't rage. It's a person who values the truth enough to thank you for it, even while it's breaking his heart completely, and then walks calmly toward a life that doesn't include you anymore. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive myself for making him learn that lesson at my expense, but I've come to understand, finally, why he thanked me instead of screaming. Some people would rather grieve something real than keep living inside something false. Callum was one of them. I'm still learning, slowly, to become someone capable of that same kind of honesty myself. The end.